This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
In the same week that Cyprus is celebrating its election to the United Nations Council of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights finds it guilty of infringing those rights.
I think it's a very important matter because on the one hand, Cyprus wants to be on the Human Rights Council. On the other hand, it also has to undertake to respect human rights and the rule of law.
Only 30% of Cyprus' population has access to shelters should they be needed in the event of war.
So they can leave their address, their postal code, and then the colleagues they will call them back, and then they will to them the closer shelters.
And on a lighter note, you're invited to an upcoming festival celebrating our ancient olive trees.
It's going to be very experiential. They will be able to try, to see, to taste, to smell. So we hope to have a unique experience with the olive oil and the olives that they do in the area.
Our government is cock-a-hoop, we could say, because earlier this week, Cyprus was elected to the United Nations Human Rights Council for the first time. Now, I found that a little surprising, because also earlier this week, the European Court of Human Rights found Cyprus guilty of pushbacks, and it said Cyprus should pay some €50,000 to two Syrian applicants who wanted to claim asylum here from Lebanon. Now, how do we conflate the two? Or should we? Well, of course, Saudi Arabia sat for many years on the UN Human Rights Council, and they haven't exactly got a pristine record themselves. But I've asked human rights lawyer Achilleas Dimitriadis to join me again on the programme to discuss these issues. Achilleas, let's start, if we may, with the Human Rights Council at the United Nations. Does it actually do anything?
Well, yes, it does. I mean, it does periodic reports for countries, so it will review a country and will give a status report on the compliance with human rights, and it goes around countries and does this all over the place. What the Cyprus government has managed, and we must congratulate them for doing so, is that it got elected to the Human Rights Council. It's one of the 47 members that get elected, and we are part of the Asia-Oceanica group. We're not part of Europe. I think we should know that as well. And we got elected, and that's very good. It's the first time that Cyprus got elected, and I think it's very important because that would mean that we will uphold the rule of law and especially respect for human rights. That's the one side of it, and you very rightly pointed out the conflict with the fact that earlier in the week, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg in France found that the Cyprus government had violated the human rights of two Syrian refugees who were in a boat that was heading for the Cyprus shores. It was stopped in the jurisdiction of the Republic of Cyprus, or within the area that Cyprus has under its jurisdiction, and then the police pushed it back into Lebanon, and that's why we had a problem with this pushback, as they call it, refoulement, as it is in French, and that was held by the court to be illegal. And I think that's where we need to concentrate, because on the one hand, it's very good to get elected in the year 2025 until 2027 to this human rights body of the United Nations. But on the other hand, is at least odd to be found liable for human rights violations, which relate to the ones that the Council will be considering. So that's really a matter that has to be highlighted and something that we have to deal with.
It does, as I say, seem odd to me that any country that has been, well, literally found guilty of ignoring or not properly enforcing human rights could even put themselves up for a seat at the UN Human Rights Council.
Well, I think the eligibility is not a function of the times that you're convicted by the European Court of Human Rights. I think there is no direct reference to it. Of course, if you are a law-abiding or perhaps an international convention-abiding country, you should respect international law. In this case, the Cyprus government was found liable for this gross violation, which was actually not only for the inhuman treatment that these people suffered, it also related to the massive expulsion. There's a specific provision under Protocol 4, Article 4 of the Convention, which does not allow mass expulsions of people, and we were done on that as well, in addition to not having an effective remedy, because the government of Cyprus argument was, these people didn't ask for asylum, they didn't ask to make an application. The applicants, of course, disproved the government, and the court opted for the applicant's position. So that was point one. Point two was that the Cyprus government was essentially claiming that both Lebanon and Syria are not dangerous places, so they can go back, and that in fact they have an agreement with Lebanon to push back these people. The court said, no, I won't have anything to do with that. These are not safe places. These people should have been allowed to apply for asylum. You failed to allow them to apply, and you pushed them back, and that is in breach of their human rights, and you have to pay 44,000 euros for damages and about 5,000 for costs. So not only do we have to pay damages, we have to pay costs, but more importantly, I think it sends a message that the Cyprus government is not really serious about this, because on the one hand, it just got done in Strasbourg. On the other hand, do not forget that for the last 3, 4, 5 months, the Cyprus government is refusing to process applications for asylum for people who come from Syria. Now, that is totally ill-founded, because you cannot discriminate in this way. And the rationale that by doing this we will stop people coming to Cyprus is, of course, irrelevant to the breach that they are committing. So we have in place this policy, which obviously has to change. And actually, there's been pushbacks in the buffer zone as well. You will remember the 70 or so people that are actually stranded in the UN buffer zone, because the Cyprus government, even though they are within its jurisdiction, is refusing to allow them to apply for asylum. It is refusing to process them, and these people are actually stranded in no man's land. Well, that seriously does not help Cyprus' position in the UN Council for Human Rights.
Well, I'm glad you brought all of that up, because it covers several things. First of all, I did read a report that the people on the boat from Lebanon did say that they had told the interpreter that they wished to apply for asylum. Now, I don't know what the legal situation is if you're on a boat in Cypriot waters. That's one point. And the second thing is that some of those in the buffer zone had reportedly actually reached Furnara, applied for asylum, and were then taken back after they had done so.
Okay, let's take the first question. The first question essentially relates to whether an oral application for asylum qualifies for an application that the Cyprus government has to provide. And the answer is clearly yes. That's what the court said. Obviously, there should have been a protocol. Obviously, there should have been a processing system in place. Obviously, it was not. But the Cyprus government's line on this was, they never asked for it. And of course, the other side was, we did. And the circumstances were such that, do you think that they did not apply? I mean, that's kind of a simplistic approach to a highly complicated matter. These people were in a refugee camp for 4 years, according to the report. They came to Cyprus exactly because it's a European country and they wanted to apply for asylum. And for the Cyprus government to put up a defense that, they didn't ask me for it, really didn't hold much water, and in the end was not accepted. Neither was the position that Lebanon or Syria were safe, or that we have an agreement with Lebanon and this is what we are doing. All this were not acceptable by the court, were not accepted by the court, which came down with a clear violation, establishment of a violation. And the Cyprus government not only has to pay the damages awarded, it also has to change its policies. It's what in the legal jargon we refer to as general measures. People affected by this practice of the Cyprus government are entitled to the same remedy. Therefore, if the Cyprus government does not change its policy, it will be done again, and it's only a matter of time. And just because the process takes long doesn't mean that the result will not be the same. And the Cyprus courts now are bound by the judgment in Strasbourg, and when this matter is brought before the administrative court or the Supreme Court, the courts will have to be bound. The courts are bound by this judgment, and they cannot rule otherwise.
Well, and the other thing I think that came out of Strasbourg was that the court said that we could not rely on obligations arising out of bilateral agreements with other countries. So, in other words, the agreement with Lebanon for the pushbacks isn't worth the paper it's written on.
Totally correct. I mean, you can't wash away your liability by passing it on to another country. This is a liability, an obligation that is generated by the European Convention on Human Rights. You cannot avoid it by assigning this obligation to a third country. Otherwise, the convention would never apply. This is an obligation that the Cyprus government has to fulfill. It has failed to fulfill it in that it has failed to allow these people to apply for asylum, not necessarily to get granted, but to apply for it. And because they have failed to provide this service, which is an international obligation, a violation of these people's human rights was established.
Do you see that there's a possibility now, once this gets out, as it were, well, it is out, it's in the press, that it will unleash a wave of similar cases and we will end up paying left, right and centre?
Oh, I think already cases are in the pipeline. I mean, these 70 people that are stranded in the buffer zone is an outrage. I mean, you cannot allow people to remain in the buffer zone. I mean, August, 40 degrees, 42, 43, in tents, children, women. I mean, you cannot do this in a civilized country just because you have decided that this is my policy. And especially Cyprus, which is a country that relies on human rights to preserve its existence and wants to turn to Strasbourg for legal support so that it continues its existence and it vindicates the rights of people's human rights that have been violated by Turkey. So you can't have it both ways, and I am sure that the Cyprus government will get proper legal advice, abide by the judgment, change its policies, and start processing quickly these applications. I think the problem is that they were not afforded the opportunity to apply, but if they did apply, these applications have to be processed diligently and quickly. And I'm afraid that is not happening, and that is another issue. We have to give resources for this, and then whatever the result is, it has to be acceptable after proper consideration.
And of course, we can't say that certain nationalities just are not going to count and we won't even accept an application. That's totally illegal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the logo that the Cyprus government was using in its campaign was full enjoyment of human rights on an equal footing. Well, how can you have an equal footing in relation to Syrians whose applications are not processed, period?
As always, you sum it up so succinctly. Achilleus, I thank you once again for your time. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you very much for discussing this. And I think it's a very important matter because on the one hand, Cyprus wants to be on the Human Rights Council. On the other hand, it also has to undertake to respect human rights and the rule of law.
Indeed, that is Achilleas Dimitriadis, human rights lawyer in Nicosia.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
With tensions rising across the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean, it was hardly surprising that at the end of last week we saw in the newspapers that we have shelters in Cyprus for just 30% of our population. Now, a lot of people might say, hang on a minute, let's panic people. Well, we're not going to panic people because I think it's fair to say it's highly unlikely that we will need to use those shelters. But it did occur to me that possibly even in peacetime, it's perhaps a good idea for populations and countries to know that there is a shelter that they can go to in emergencies. So I've asked Panayiotis Liasidis, who is the spokesperson for our civil defence, to join me on this week's programme. Panayiotis, first of all, I never knew we had shelters, and I've been here for, 40-odd years. So how do we find out where these shelters are? And then I want to talk about how we make sure that most of the population is covered.
Yes. So, yes, for sure, we have shelters. And the people, the citizens, they can call to our command and control center, which is working 24/7. In Nicosia, the numbers are 22 403 450 and 22 403 452. So they can leave their address, their postal code, and then the colleagues, they will call them back, and then they will to them the closer shelters.
Would it not be easier just for this information to be available online? Can't I log into your website, put in my postcode and find my nearest shelter?
You see, now I plan to do this, but this information is very sensitive, so we have to find, let's say, the ways in order to avoid any problems with this information.
You mean that they could be targeted in the event that we were attacked?
Yes,
so
sensitive information.
30% though is, far less than half the population. What plans are there to expand the number of shelters so that almost all the population has quick access just in case?
Our plan is to increase the coverage to 70%. We're in contact with the church in order to give us a detailed, let's say, catalog with the churches in Cyprus in order to check if they have basements to be used for this region. Additionally, as we know, the new, let's say, developments, they have basements which can be used also for this reason. And also, we're in contact with service that is responsible for the governmental buildings. Either these are private under rent or are public buildings, in order to check if they have basement and can be used for shelters. Additionally, I can say that the citizens, they can check in their house, in their office, let's say, and they can find a suitable place for protection. So this place should be in a basement, should be away from glass, and to offer protection in case of any problem.
Right, if we look back, and I remember the case in Ukraine a couple of years ago where people were sheltering in the basement of a theatre, and the theatre was bombed and the basement provided no protection at all.
Yes, sure, for sure, there is this possibility, and this, usually the people, they have to stay in the shelter, but you never know what will happen.
And if we look at what's happening at the present time, very close to our shores, churches, places of worship have been primary targets. So is that the best place to go?
It's better to have a shelter. Otherwise, you will be very vulnerable in case of bombardment. So it's better to be in a shelter than outside.
Yeah, I guess so. But let me ask you if there are any plans to build shelters that would withstand the type of bombs that people use these days.
You mean for the new generation bombs?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a shelter, you want to be pretty sure that it is a shelter and not just, well, the basement of a church.
Yeah, there are some, let's say, standards that we follow, and then we'll follow these standards for the shelters.
And do you have a timeline as to when these might be rolled out? I mean, we are being, as I say, I don't want to panic people, but it does seem that it should be a fairly basic requirement when things are so very, well, volatile. Maybe all countries should have the facility to protect their citizens as best as possible. And do we have plans to build purpose-built shelters for the future?
As I said, this is in our plan to increase the coverage of the citizens. You know that if you cover, let's say, 70% of the citizens, the other, let's say, remaining percentage will go to work in, let's say, in social services, to the army and other, let's say, services.
So you mean they'll be on active duty and unable to take shelter anyway? What about the other things that the civil defence does in terms of, for example, providing food and water? I know that people go to shelters for short spaces of time. We can see in Ukraine they sound the all clear and everybody gets out and goes on with their daily lives.
Yeah.
But there are occasions when sustained attacks take place. What do you do in those cases?
Yes. So, as you know, the shelters are for some hours, and will be the people have to stay in the shelters during the bombing. But in case they need to stay for a long time in the shelters, so we'll have our plans and then we'll provide food to the citizens. But it's good for the citizens to have something ready for them, let's say for dry food, hygiene items, medicines for the old people, water, radio, just to hear the news, let's say, to be informed about the news. And it will have also children to have their dry food.
And presumably a couple of toys to keep them occupied, because it would be a difficult time. Panayiotis, of course, I emphasise once again that this is purely an information chat, because there's no possibility, I think, at the moment that these things will be needed, but we do need to know about them. Many thanks for telling us about it.
Yes, it's what we used to do for all the, let's say, the threats that we have. Maybe we have, let's say, formation for self-protection measures, for the earthquakes, for the heavy raining, for all the threats, let's say. And also this one is included in this campaign.
And we should
want the people to be afraid or to worry about it, but we have to prepare everything to be ready for any case.
Just tell me, if you will, the website where people can see what you guys do and maybe get those phone numbers.
It's
BeSafe.net.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Panayiotis Liasidis, Civil Defence Spokesperson.
Thank you very much.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
We're going to talk now about something that's coming up on the 20th of October. And between 11 in the morning and 7 p.m, you're invited to join the Olive Festival. To tell us all about it, from the Troodos Network, we welcome Iula Michailidou.
We are working with the 80 different communities, trying to bring out the unique characteristics and the unique identity that they have. So in this case, in Paramari, we found that the village is blessed with very, very ancient olive trees. So the festival is going to be related to the olive trees and to the unique oil that they are giving us, as well as the techniques that they are using in the village for making the green olives, takistes, as we say in the Cypriot dialect. We believe that each village is a unique treasure. So we are trying to bring out this unique identity and the unique characteristics that they have, and create a unique experience for the tourists as well. So it's going to be Very experiential. They will be able to try, to see, to taste, to smell. So we hope to have a unique experience with the olive oil and the olives that they do in the area.
And what about olive picking? Because it's that season or coming up, isn't it? Will the people be able to help pick the olives?
Well, that's a very good idea. You're absolutely right that they're picking. So every time that we are there, we see people picking. Well, we haven't included actually this in the activities for this year, but maybe next year. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be done. Well, if they want to pick few around from where they are, they can, but it's not going to be organized. We have 4 workshops for children because we see each festival as an opportunity for adults and families to go out and enjoy. So as far as activities are concerned, a part of the tasting, the music, the 25 exhibitors which are going to be there, which will be related to the theme and the local products. We will be having 4 workshops for children where they will be able to create things with the wood, as well as the beads as well, the seeds inside, which usually are either thrown away or, they're not usually used for many things. But in this case, we will have trainers who will show them how to do their own frames and different arts and crafts using the seeds of the olive.
Right, now tell me more about paramali. I never really associated that particularly with ancient olive trees.
Okay, paramalism is a unique case because after 1974, the people who are living there, they're coming from different parts of Cyprus. So we have different cultures. These people, they lost their houses actually during the war, and they came to the village and they started a new life there. The village seems to be that it was a resort during the Venetian time, and this is why we have so many olive trees since that time. So there are so many of them around, and when we were invited by the community council saying that we would like to do a festival which is related to the olive oil, we found out that the most unique thing they have is the Asian trees. So the initial idea was to do a festival about the olive oil, but when we examined the area and we saw how many Asian olive trees they had, we decided together that the best thing to work on and make it very, very unique was the Asian olive trees. And from these trees, you get unique olive oil and also unique olives. The oil that is extracted from these trees, from the olives of these trees, is considered to be very, very beneficial, especially for athletes, for pregnant women, and for people who are having health issues. So we can say that it has a lot of healing and therapeutic properties.
So people are going to see all these ancient olive trees. How many have they got in Paramali?
Hundreds of them.
Literally hundreds of them. So people can admire those, and some of them are amazing to look at because you think that there are holes in the middle, but they've been growing for all those years. But it's not just about the olives. You've also got an entertainment program, I think.
Exactly. We have live music throughout the day. We've got folklore dancing. So the people who are going to come will be very happy and amused by everything that they will see around. Also, at the entrance of the festival, people will be able to taste the traditional way that people were doing their toast. So there will be traditional bread, which is going to be toasted with oregano and olive oil from the Asian olive trees. So this is going to be a treat for everybody.
And the music and the entire festival atmosphere. That is the Ancient Olive Tree Festival, taking place on Sunday, October the 20th, a date for your diary. It's in Paramali, which is a historic village in Cyprus. Eula Michailidis, many thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rosie.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.